Hey, I'm Jimmy from jimmyrose.me, and in this video you're going to learn how to integrate Google Sheets with Zapier so that you can talk to all kinds of different apps that are already in your workflow. You're going to learn the 5 most common triggers and actions and actually see how to use them in real life. I've done this a few times before. You'll see my Zapier account runs about 16,000 tasks per month and has about 56 automations currently set up in there. Using Google Sheets with Zapier is extremely powerful if you know how to use it, and I would go as far as to say it is one of the most important Zapier skills you can master. In this video, I'm not going to go into every detail about how Zapier works. If you're brand new to Zapier, I would recommend you first start with my Zapier tutorial video, which I will link up below. And I'm going to focus on the simple stuff with Google Sheets and Zapier in this video. If you're already a little bit familiar or just want to get into the advanced stuff, I will link up to some cool tips and tricks using Google Sheets and Zapier in the description below the video. A final note before we kick off is that user interfaces tend to change. I'm going to be recording my screen here with Zapier. You may notice things have changed since I've recorded this video. Hopefully the process is still pretty much the same and you can work it out. If things get a little bit too crazy, I'll just record a new video and you'll find it in the description below. All right, now let's jump over to Zapier. Here you can see the Google Sheets integration page on Zapier. This is just the standard documentation page. You can get to this when you're logged into your account using the Explore button over here or apps in the top bar here if you're not logged in. This has a bunch of information, but the most useful stuff is down here at the bottom. If we go to the section where it lists out the triggers, actions, and searches that you can do with Google Sheets. So this is the best way to see what any app in Zapier is capable of. So let's have a quick look through here. So triggers are what initiates a workflow in Zapier. So we've got some here so you can see this tag means that that will instantly run. You don't have to wait a few minutes for Zapier to pick it up. It's just instant. And you can see we've got new spreadsheet row here. So that means every time you add a row to a spreadsheet, it's going to fire off a workflow. And don't worry, you'll see this in action shortly. You can see here they've got the same action, but for team drives. It's just because Google's team drives work a little bit differently. If you don't know what team drives are, don't even worry about it. This one here fires the workflow whenever we have a new or updated spreadsheet row. So it's pretty much the same as this one, but if you go back and edit a row that was already there, it's going to trigger the workflow again. Then we've got these two here, new spreadsheet and new worksheet, and you're probably not going to use those very often. The main 2 triggers we're going to focus in this video are the new spreadsheet row or new or updated spreadsheet row. Moving on to actions, these are the actions you can perform in Google Sheets from your workflows. So let's say someone fills out a contact form on your site, that might be the trigger. The action could be add them to the spreadsheet, and you'll see exactly how to do this shortly. So you can see we've got a bunch here. So you can see here we can create a spreadsheet row, we can update an existing row, create multiple rows, create an entirely new spreadsheet, create a worksheet that's like a tab in Google Sheets or Excel. If you're familiar with that, it might be create a new tab at the bottom. We can create columns, copy existing sheets, or delete rows. Now the main 2 we are going to focus on here are creating rows and updating rows, and you'll see these in action in this video. And finally, we're going to jump over to searches, and this is a special kind of action where it's basically just looking up something in Google Sheets. The only one you really need to know here is find or create row. So 90% of the time, there are only 5 of these you're ever going to use, and that's what we'll focus on in this video. Those are the triggers for new spreadsheet row and updated spreadsheet row, the actions to create a row or update a row, and the search to find or create a row. And you'll see all of these in action shortly. The workflow we're going to look at here is if you have someone submit a contact form on your website and you want to put those people into a Google Sheet. So we're just going to go really simple here. Over in Typeform here, I have set up an extremely simple form. It's just your name, your email, and a message. So let's go and create a simple spreadsheet where we're going to put those 3 different bits of information. It's got a new tab here. You actually just go sheets.new in your browser and Google will create a new sheet. Let's name that Google Sheets test. and put those 3 columns in. So it was name, email, and a message. I'm going to bold that and freeze the top row just to make a nice little heading there. So now let's go and set this up in Zapier. Back over on my homepage, I'm going to click the button to create a zap. And our trigger is going to be Typeform. We want it to trigger when there's a new entry on the form. So I'm going to continue through, connect my Typeform account, and select that form that I've created. We'll just get some test data in. So here is the person that I've submitted already. We just want to make sure the details look all right there. So we've got a message and an email and a name. Looks good. Let's jump through. And this is where we get to Google Sheets. So I'm just going to search for Google Sheets in there, add it in, and we're simply going to create a spreadsheet row. Continue. You just want to select the account here. If you haven't used this before, you'll just click this add a new account button to connect your Google Sheets account and then go continue. Now, hopefully the spreadsheet we just created should show up here. There it is, Google Sheets test. If you have multiple drives, you might need to select it from here, but luckily that has come through. And we're just going to pick the first worksheet there. And you can see it's pulled through our 3 columns, name, email, and message. But now all we have to do is map in those 3 different fields. So from the name, we click here and you can see it's pulled in the data from Typeform. I'm going to show all options and we can see the name is there. That's it. Click in here, same deal, map in email and the message. Hit continue. We can run a test. And you'll see if we jump over to Google Sheets, that has worked. Now notice because I bolded that, it's automatically bolded the next row. So if you unbold that, make this look a bit better. From now on, they won't be bold. And now we have an automatic list of everyone who submits that form. Just got to make sure now that we've run that test, we do turn that zap on. And then I'll jump back over to Typeform and do a quick test. If I jump back up to the top here, let's go Bob. So we've submitted that form and we should see that show up. It's beat me to it. Before I could even get over to the sheet, that has already come through to the sheet. So you can see how easy that was to set up an automatic workflow to add everyone that fills in a contact form to a Google Sheet. Now let's have a look at Google Sheets triggers in Zapier. So back over here, I'm going to jump back and create a new Zap. And this time we're going to search for Google Sheets in the trigger. And you can see these are the trigger options we have. And we'll start with new spreadsheet row. So it says it right there. This is triggered when a new row is added to the bottom of a spreadsheet. Notice the keyword there, bottom. If you insert data in the middle of your spreadsheet somewhere, this won't actually fire and it can cause problems. So that's just something to bear in mind when you are setting up your workflows. So now let's pretend that any row that appears in this spreadsheet, we want to put that person in our CRM. So back at Zapier, we're going to trigger on new spreadsheet row and continue. Select our account and choose the spreadsheet. We've only got the one worksheet. That'll jump through to the testing stage and we just hit the test trigger button and it will actually grab that last row. You can see the information here is a bit funny. It says col A, col B, but it actually will turn that into name and email when we get down into the action. So just make sure you've got some sample data there and continue. Now for my CRM, I use ActiveCampaign. So I'll just do a quick demo here. The action I'm going to use is to create a contact in my CRM. Choose my account. So the only things I really care about for the demo's sake are email and name. So I'm just going to click in here and you'll see it has actually changed that to email. So it's a bit easier to see. And the full name there. I'm not going to run through and test this. I'm sure you can see what's going to happen. Basically, once I turn that on, every time something gets added to the bottom row here, it's going to fire that trigger which was new spreadsheet row, and it's going to process this workflow. So in this case, it's going to add a contact in my ActiveCampaign account. Now that's going to work even if we add something in manually here. Like if I write Sally, this would still fire off that automation even though it didn't come from our Typeform. This is completely independent of the other workflow that we set up. So you might remember another trigger we were going to look at was when a row is updated. So back over at Zapier, I'm going to change this trigger here to be new or updated spreadsheet row. So note that this will trigger on both new rows and updated rows, which is fine. You just have to account for that in your workflow. So using this trigger, we could actually use this exact same workflow here so that if I come in later and change the information based on something we spoke about, I might change the message, and that will actually trigger this new or updated row. And then if we wanted to push that new message through to ActiveCampaign, thankfully this says create or update contact, which means we can actually update that person in our CRM with the new message. But you can do some other cool things as well. Let's say we only want to add people from this spreadsheet to our CRM once we have checked them over. So we might have another column here. So everyone comes in from the contact form automatically here. And only when we put a Y in this column do we want them to push through to the CRM. So to do this, back over at Zapier, I'm going to stick with new or updated row and run that test. Now it's actually pulled through all three of our rows here. So if I click on one, you can see that's Sally. So that's not the right one. We actually want this Bob row with the Y. And it's this one here. So now what we can do is add an extra step in here, which is called a filter. And we'll only continue this workflow if the checked column exactly matches the letter Y. So this really simple workflow is simply going to trigger every time a row is updated here. It's going to run this filter, which says only continue the workflow if checked matches Y, and then we add it to this CRM. So that gives us kind of a manual intervention in between the contact form and the CRM, which could be handy. Now let's move on to the search. If you remember here, there is a lookup spreadsheet row. Now the difference between lookup spreadsheet row and find or create row is that I'm pretty sure find or create row is just an old version and it doesn't actually apply anymore. And in a second, you'll see that it doesn't even show up in the actions list in Zapier. Now the reason I skipped the other trigger earlier, update spreadsheet row, is because that usually works in conjunction with a lookup. So we have to look up the row to be able to update it. But let's look at another real world example. What if someone comes into the contact form and submits it again? The same person submits it with the same email address. If we don't want to have that person in the CRM multiple times or the spreadsheet multiple times, then the way to do that is to first look up the row and see if they're there, and we might do something different. So let's jump back to Zapier. Now this is the original workflow again. So we've got the new entry in the contact form. We're going to do something, so maybe add them to the spreadsheet. But this time we're not going to just add them. We're going to use that search. So Google Sheets and show all, just so you can see all the searches and actions here. We're going to use the lookup spreadsheet row and continue. Choose our account. I'll skip through this because you don't need to see it again. And this time you can see it's asking us what column we want to look up. So let's choose email, as that's more likely to be unique. So I'm going to choose it there. And the value we are going to look up in that email is the email that came from the contact form. So it simply says we're going to look up this column for this value. And something really important to note here is that we've got this option to create the row if it doesn't exist yet. So we've got a couple of things going on here. Basically, if it's the first time someone submits the form and they're not in the sheet, we do want to create them in that sheet. Otherwise, we want to update it. So in this step, we're looking up the row, but if it doesn't exist yet, we do want to create it. So just tick that box. It's going to add a few extra options here, and we just map in the same information as before. So name, email, and message. If we continue and run the test, remember the input that we just tested with was bob@example.com, and it's actually gone and found the row, and we have an extra piece of data here that's saying that it actually found an existing row. And this is really handy because now we only really want to run the step to update this row if we found a row. And that's where this comes in handy. So we can create a filter. And we only want to continue if data was found. Remember that was true. So we're going to look for Boolean in this list is true. And you can see when we ran a test on the filter that this Zap would have continued based on this filter. So now we're going to go ahead and update that row with whatever Bob's new message is. So this is where we add the action to update the spreadsheet row. But first, let's quickly jump back to the spreadsheet and actually add the column we want. So let's say we have a column here that says, have they submitted this form multiple times? Let's just call it multiple. And we want to stick a Y in it if they've filled the form out multiple times. Jump back here. We'll add the action to update the spreadsheet row. As usual, we select the spreadsheet and worksheet, and then we have to select the row. If I open that up, it actually just gives us all the rows that are currently in the spreadsheet. So this isn't very handy unless you want to update the same row every time, which is unlikely. We actually want to use the row that we looked up earlier. So we flip over to custom, and there's the step where we looked up the row. And we're going to use the row ID. There is a kind of shortcut to this. If you happened to create this step first and you hadn't created the lookup step yet, you can hit this button here and it will actually automatically add what we did earlier. I just think it doesn't make as much sense to do it that way. You're kind of building the Zap backwards, but it is there. If you find yourself in this position, you realize you haven't created that search step, you can just click this button here. But we just need to map in that ID, which we have, and then say what the new data will be. And in this case, it's going to be whatever came in from the form. Name, email, and message. Technically, email is not going to change because we just looked up this spreadsheet on email, so it's going to be exactly the same. But because now we know we're updating an existing row, we're going to put a Y in that multiple column. Continue. I'm going to skip the test on this one and turn the Zap on just so you can see. So if we look back on our spreadsheet, I am just going to resubmit the form as me. So I'm going to say Jimmy Rose again, put in my email, but let's say a different message this time. And submit. We jump back here. You can see it just updated. So the new message came in and it put the Y in the multiple column. So that's it for the most common triggers and actions. Now, the combination of looking up rows and updating them is extremely powerful because that means you can kind of use Google Sheets as a data storage that different workflows can access at different times. Now, that's going to be covered in one of the more advanced videos that I will link up below. You may also think that, well, instead of multiple, we want to add a count. So how many times they've filled out the contact form. I didn't go into that because we're getting a bit out of Google Sheets territory at that point. You would actually need to create an extra step in Zapier. So say this was a number, we had the number 2 there. You would need to create a new step in Zapier here called Formatter, and use numbers to basically add to the row. So we are going to perform a math operation and basically add the number 1 to the number that came out of the row previously, but I know we're getting a little bit beyond Google Sheets here, so that's one for another lesson. I cover this kind of stuff in my Zapier course, Zapier Mastery. If you would like to learn how to use Zapier and how to effectively use it in your business to save a ton of time, head over to jimmyrose.me/Zapier-mastery. Loads of students have been through there and are saving a ton of time in their business. I know my Zapier account works out at around 110 hours a month that I save. If you calculate all the different bits and pieces that run through there, it's kind of crazy what happens when you actually build your skills with Zapier and start just automating all kinds of different stuff. So if you'd like to check that out, that link is on the screen and below in the description. So there you have it. That's the 5 most common triggers and actions with Google Sheets and Zapier. That will get you through 80 to 90% of situations. Feel free to have a dig through those more complex triggers and actions that we didn't cover. Also, check below the video for links to the more advanced Google Sheets videos. We're going to look at some cool things like bulk importing to tools using Google Sheets, using Google Sheets as data storage, randomizing data, like even potentially building a social media scheduler that posts random things out of Google. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with Sheets. If you've enjoyed this video or you just want tips on how to get more productive and how to automate your business, hit that red subscribe button below. That's it. I'll see you in the next video.